So I'm sitting here having my coffee this morning, scrolling through my phone, and I see that First Take is about to start, and normally I might skip it depending on what topics they're covering. But today I see they're talking about the Knicks and potential trade deadline moves, and I'm like, okay, I need to hear this because the deadline is literally right around the corner, and the Knicks have been connected to so many different players over the past few weeks. I turn on the TV and settle in, and right from the jump, Molly Karim comes out with this energy that tells me they've got some real insider information to discuss. She's sitting there at the desk with Stephen A. Smith and Mad Dog Russo, and she starts the segment by saying they're going to break down a major development involving the New York Knicks and their pursuit of upgrading their roster before Thursday's deadline. Hey, what's up, everyone? Real quick before we get into everything. That like button is literally what determines if this reaches hundreds or thousands of fans. Takes 1 second, but makes a huge impact on the channel's growth. Just smash that like button right now. It's the easiest thing you can do. But honestly, the biggest way to support this content. Every single like pushes this further, so hit it now. Stephen A. immediately jumps in, and you can tell he's been talking to his sources because he's got that look on his face like he knows something the rest of us don't. He says the Knicks are in a fascinating position right now because everyone's been talking about them potentially being in the mix for Giannis Antetokounmpo, which would obviously be a massive blockbuster move. But there are other, more realistic targets the Knicks are seriously pursuing that could actually help them more in the short term. He says the Knicks still believe they're the best team in the Eastern Conference, despite being behind Detroit in the standings, and they're looking to add pieces that can help them prove that when the playoffs come around. Mad Dog's nodding along, and he jumps in to say, yeah, the Knicks have been on a nice little run lately. They're starting to look like the team everyone expected them to be at the beginning of the season, but they still have some glaring needs that need to be addressed. Molly asks what those needs are specifically, and Stephen A. doesn't hesitate. He says the Knicks need more ball handling and playmaking, especially when Jalen Brunson is off the floor or when he needs a breather. He talks about how the offense can stagnate at times when Brunson's not orchestrating everything, and they need someone who can come in and run the show, keep the offense flowing, and create opportunities for others. Stephen A. says they also need more perimeter defense and just overall backcourt depth because, right now, if something happens to Brunson or if he gets into foul trouble in a playoff game, the Knicks are kind of screwed. Mad Dog agrees and says depth is always the thing that separates championship teams from pretenders. You need guys who can step up when your stars are struggling or when injuries happen. Then Stephen A. drops a name that honestly caught me completely off guard. He says, according to his sources in New York, the Knicks have been exploring the possibility of trading for Ayo Dosunmu from the Chicago Bulls. I literally pause mid-sip of my coffee because I was not expecting that name at all. I mean, we've heard the Knicks connected to bigger names. We've heard about them trying to get Jose Alvarado from New Orleans. But Ayo Dosunmu? That's a new one. But then Stephen A. starts explaining why this makes sense, and the more he talks, the more I'm like, okay, I can see it. He says Dosunmu is exactly the type of player the Knicks should be targeting right now. He's a versatile guard who can handle the ball, he can create for himself and others, he can defend at a high level, and most importantly, he's on a very affordable contract that's about to expire, which means the Knicks wouldn't be taking on long-term salary commitments. Stephen A. says this is crucial for a team like New York that's already dealing with cap constraints and has to be careful about every move they make financially. He mentions that Dosunmu is making something like $5 or $6 million this season, which is nothing for a player of his caliber. And he's going to be a restricted free agent soon, which would give the Knicks some control if they wanted to keep him beyond this year. Mad Dog gets excited about this idea, and he starts going through Dosunmu's stats and what he brings to the table. He says Dosunmu averaged around 12 or 13 points last season. He's shooting a decent percentage from three, and he's one of the better perimeter defenders on a Chicago team that's been struggling all year. Mad Dog makes the point that Dosunmu can play both on and off the ball, which is perfect for the Knicks because he can play alongside Brunson in some lineups and then run the offense when Brunson sits. He says this kind of versatility is exactly what championship teams need. Guys who can fill multiple roles and adapt to different situations. Stephen A. comes back and says, "The beauty of targeting a guy like Dosunmu is that he won't cost the Knicks a fortune in terms of assets to acquire." He explains that the Bulls are clearly going nowhere this season. They're a play-in team at best, and probably not even that, so they should be willing to move pieces like Dosunmu if the price is right. Stephen A. says the Knicks have a bunch of second-round picks they can offer. They've got some young players who haven't really panned out that they could include, and that might be enough to get Chicago interested. He specifically mentions that the Knicks have something like 7 second-round picks at their disposal, and if you include the Washington Wizards pick they own, which is likely to convert into 2 more second-rounders, that number goes up to 9. Stephen A. says, "That's a lot of ammunition to work with when you're trying to make a deal for a guy like Dosunmu." Mad Dog brings up an interesting point about the Bulls' perspective in all this. He says Chicago is in a weird spot right now where they're not good enough to compete for anything meaningful, but they're also not bad enough to get a top lottery pick, so they're kind of stuck in no man's land. He says the smart thing for the Bulls to do would be to blow it up, trade their veteran pieces and middling young players for future assets, and start a proper rebuild. Mad Dog says Dosunmu is a nice player, but he doesn't fit the timeline of a rebuilding team, so trading him for draft picks makes a lot of sense. Stephen A. agrees and says, yeah, and from the Bulls' perspective, if they can get multiple second-round picks for Dosunmu, that's a win because second-rounders are valuable currency in the NBA. You can use them to move up in the draft. You can package them in other trades, or you can actually find hidden gems if you draft well. Molly asks them to break down exactly how Dosunmu would fit with the Knicks, and this is where both guys get really detailed about the basketball aspect of it. Stephen A. says, imagine you've got Jalen Brunson running the point, and you bring Dosunmu in as your 6th man, or you stagger their minute so that one of them is always on the floor. He says Dosunmu can handle the ball and run pick and roll, which takes pressure off Brunson and keeps the offense moving even when your star player needs a rest. Stephen A. talks about how the Knicks have struggled at times this season when Brunson's off the court because they don't have another reliable ball handler who can create shots, and Dosunmu would solve that problem immediately. Mad Dog adds that Dosunmu's defensive ability is what really makes him valuable for the Knicks. He says the Knicks pride themselves on being a tough, physical defensive team, and Dosunmu fits that identity perfectly. Mad Dog mentions that Dosunmu is 6'5" with long arms, so he can guard multiple positions. He's got the lateral quickness to stay with quick guards, and he's got the strength to body up bigger wings. Mad Dog says when you're playing in the Eastern Conference and you've got to deal with guys like Tyrese Maxey and Donovan Mitchell and all these elite scorers, you need multiple guys who can take on those defensive assignments, and Dosunmu gives you another option. Stephen A. then brings up a comparison that I thought was really smart. He says Dosunmu reminds him a little bit of Josh Hart in terms of the role he could play for the Knicks. He's not saying they're identical players, but he's saying both guys are versatile, high-energy players who can do a little bit of everything without needing to be the focal point of the offense. Stephen A. says Josh Hart has been invaluable for the Knicks this season. He does all the dirty work. He rebounds, he defends, he makes winning plays. And if you can add another guy like that in Dosunmu, you're just making your team deeper and more resilient. Mad Dog loves this comparison and says exactly that's what the Knicks need more of. He talks about how the Knicks' championship aspirations are built on having a deep roster where you've got 7 or 8 guys who can contribute meaningful minutes in the playoffs. Mad Dog says right now, the Knicks are probably 6 or 7 deep in terms of guys you can trust, and they need to get to 8 or 9. Dosunmu would be that 8th guy, someone who can come in and give you quality minutes without the coaching staff having to worry about him making mistakes or getting exposed. The conversation then shifts to talking about what a potential trade package would look like. And this is where things get into the specifics of NBA trade mechanics. Stephen A. says the Bulls are probably going to want at least a couple of assets back, whether that's young players or draft picks or a combination of both. He suggests the Knicks could offer someone like Pacomi Dadiet, who's a young player with some upside but hasn't really gotten meaningful minutes with the Knicks, along with 2 or 3 second-round picks. Stephen A. says Dadiet has more value than people think because he's young, and teams like the Bulls, who are rebuilding, love to take flyers on young guys who might develop into something down the line. Mad Dog says the other piece of this puzzle is making the salaries match. Because in the NBA, you can't just trade players willy-nilly, the numbers have to work within the salary cap rules. He says the Knicks might need to include someone like Jericho Sims or another player making a few $1 million just to make the math work. Mad Dog says this is where having a good general manager like Leon Rose is crucial, because you need someone who understands the intricacies of the CBA and can structure deals that benefit your team without handcuffing you financially down the road. Stephen A. brings up another interesting angle that I hadn't really considered. He says one of the benefits of trading for Dosunmu now is that the Knicks would have his bird rights if they acquire him before the deadline, which means they could re-sign him in the offseason even if they're over the salary cap. Stephen A. explains that Dosunmu is going to be a restricted free agent, and if the Knicks don't trade for him now, some other team might sign him to an offer sheet in the summer, and the Bulls might not match, which means the Knicks would lose out on him entirely. But if they trade for him now, they control his destiny and can decide whether to bring him back long-term. Mad Dog nods along and says, "That's smart planning, that's thinking ahead, and that's what good franchises do." He says, the Knicks can't just think about this season. They have to think about next season and the season after that, and acquiring Dosunmu now gives them more options moving forward. Mad Dog says even if Dosunmu is just a rental for this season and he walks in free agency, the Knicks are better off having had him for the playoff run than not having him at all. Molly brings up the question that a lot of Knicks fans are probably wondering, which is whether trading for Dosunmu means the Knicks are giving up on making a bigger splash before the deadline. Stephen A. says not necessarily. He thinks the Knicks can do multiple things. He mentions that there have been reports about the Knicks being interested in Jose Alvarado from New Orleans and also Yves Missi, who's a young big man with the Pelicans. Stephen A. says if the Knicks are being aggressive, they could theoretically make multiple smaller moves that add up to a significant roster improvement. He says, imagine the Knicks adding Dosunmu and Alvarado. Now you've got 2 new guards who can defend and handle the ball. That's a major upgrade to your backcourt depth. Mad Dog pushes back a little bit on this idea. He says, sure, it'd be great to add multiple players, but the Knicks don't have unlimited assets to trade. He says every second-round pick they give up for Dosunmu is a pick they can't use to get Alvarado or someone else. Mad Dog says the Knicks need to be strategic about where they deploy their resources, and they can't just make trades for the sake of making trades. He says if Dosunmu is the best available option at the deadline, then you go get him, and you're satisfied with that. But if there's a chance to get someone better or to package multiple smaller deals into one bigger deal, then maybe you explore that instead. Stephen A. disagrees with Mad Dog's conservative approach. He says, look, the Knicks are in win-now mode. They've got Jalen Brunson playing at an all-NBA level. They've got Julius Randle and OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges. This is their window to compete for a championship. Stephen A. says, you can't be timid when you're in this position. You have to be aggressive and go get the players you need to put yourself over the top. He says second-round picks are nice to have, but they rarely turn into impact players. So if you can trade a bunch of them for guys who can actually help you win games right now, you do it without hesitation. The debate between them continues for a while, and it's actually really entertaining because both guys make valid points. Mad Dog is being the voice of reason, saying the Knicks need to be smart and not give up too much for role players. Stephen A. is being the voice of aggression, saying the Knicks need to strike while the iron is hot because championship windows don't stay open forever. Molly's trying to moderate and asking follow-up questions that keep the conversation moving. And honestly, it's just really good television. At one point, Stephen A. brings up the fact that Dosunmu is from Chicago, he played college ball at Illinois, and he's been with the Bulls his whole NBA career, so there might be some emotional attachment there. Stephen A. says that could be a factor in whether Dosunmu would be happy getting traded to New York, but then he counters his own point by saying at the end of the day, players want to win, and they want to be in situations where they can succeed. He says, the Bulls are a mess right now. They're not going anywhere, and if Dosunmu gets a chance to go to New York and play for a contender and compete in the playoffs, that's an opportunity most players would jump at. Mad Dog agrees and says, yeah, plus playing in New York is a completely different level of exposure and spotlight than playing in Chicago for a mediocre Bulls team. He says if Dosunmu has any aspirations of building his brand, getting endorsement deals, becoming a more well-known player around the league, going to the Knicks would be a great career move for him. Mad Dog says, New York is the biggest basketball market in the world, and if you perform well there, especially in the playoffs, it can change your entire trajectory as a player. Stephen A. then makes a really interesting point about the Knicks' roster construction and how Dosunmu would fit into their long-term plan. He says the Knicks are built around Jalen Brunson, and they've surrounded him with versatile wings like OG Anunoby and Mikal Bridges, who can defend and shoot. Stephen A. says adding Dosunmu to that mix gives them even more versatility because now you can play bigger lineups with Dosunmu at point guard, or you can play smaller lineups with Brunson and Dosunmu together. He says this kind of lineup flexibility is what the best teams in the league have, teams like Boston and Oklahoma City, who can throw out different looks depending on the matchup. Mad Dog brings up the defensive side of things again because he says that's really where Dosunmu would make his biggest impact. He talks about how the Knicks already have a really good defense. They're one of the top defensive teams in the league, but you can never have enough guys who can defend at a high level. Mad Dog says in the playoffs, when every possession matters and teams are running their best sets, trying to exploit any weakness you have, you need to have multiple defenders who can switch and communicate and make life difficult for the other team's scorers. He says Dosunmu would give the Knicks another weapon in that regard. The conversation continues, and they start talking about the timeline of all this. Stephen A. says the trade deadline is Thursday, which is literally just a few days away, so the Knicks don't have much time to figure out what they want to do. He says this is crunch time, and general managers are working the phones non-stop, trying to finalize deals before the deadline passes. Stephen A. says he wouldn't be surprised if we see a flurry of trades happen all at once in the final hours before the deadline, and the Knicks are definitely going to be involved in some capacity. Mad Dog says he thinks the Knicks are going to make at least one move. He doesn't think they're going to stand pat. He bases this on the fact that Leon Rose and the front office have been very active in trade discussions over the past few weeks. And usually when there's that much smoke, there's fire. Mad Dog says whether it's Dosunmu or Alvarado or someone else entirely, the Knicks are going to do something to improve their roster before Thursday. Molly asks them point blank, if you're the Knicks, do you make this Dosunmu trade? Stephen A. doesn't hesitate. He says, absolutely. 100% yes. He says Dosunmu is exactly the type of player the Knicks need. He's affordable, he's versatile, he fits their system, and he wouldn't cost them any of their core pieces. Stephen A. says if you can get Dosunmu for a package centered around Pacome Dadiet and a couple of second-round picks, that's a no-brainer. You make that deal, and you don't look back. Mad Dog has a slightly different take. He says he likes Dosunmu as a player, but he wants to make sure the Knicks aren't settling for him when there might be better options available. Mad Dog says if the Knicks can get Jose Alvarado and Yves Missi from New Orleans in a bigger package deal, that might be more impactful than just getting Dosunmu. He says he wants the Knicks to explore all their options before pulling the trigger on anything, but if Dosunmu is the best they can do, Then, yeah, you make that move. Stephen A fires back and says, "But that's the problem with waiting and trying to be too perfect. Sometimes you miss out on good opportunities." He says if the Knicks wait too long hoping for a better deal, Dosunmu might get traded to another team, and then they're left scrambling at the last minute trying to find someone else. Stephen A says, when you identify a player who fits your needs and the price is reasonable, you go get him and you don't overthink it. They go back and forth on this for a bit longer, and eventually Molly has to step in and move the conversation along because they're running out of time. She asks them to give their final thoughts on what they expect to happen over the next few days leading up to the deadline. Stephen A says he expects the Knicks to be very active. He thinks they're going to make at least one significant move, and he wouldn't be shocked if Ayo Dosunmu ends up in a Knicks uniform by Thursday afternoon. He says the fit is too good, the price is too reasonable, and the Knicks are too desperate for backcourt help to let this opportunity pass them by. Mad Dog says he agrees that the Knicks will be active, but he's not as confident that Dosunmu is the guy they end up getting. He says there are a lot of moving pieces, a lot of teams making calls, and things can change very quickly. Mad Dog says he could see a scenario where the Knicks end up making a completely different trade that we haven't even heard about yet, because that's just how the NBA works sometime. But he says if they do get Dosunmu, it'd be a solid move that makes them better for the playoffs. The segment wraps up with Molly thanking both of them for the discussion and promising more trade deadline coverage throughout the week. As the show goes to commercial, I'm sitting there thinking about everything they said, and honestly, I'm pretty convinced that Ayo Dosunmu to the Knicks makes a lot of sense. I hadn't really thought about him as a target before this segment, but the more Stephen A and Mad Dog talked about it, the more it clicked for me. He's young, he's versatile, he can defend, he can handle the ball, and he's affordable. Those are all things the Knicks desperately need right now. What really resonated with me was Stephen A's point about not overthinking things and just making moves when good opportunities present themselves. The Knicks are in a great position this season. They're legitimate contenders in the East, and they need to capitalize on that by adding pieces that can help them in the playoffs. Dosunmu might not be a flashy name, he's not going to sell jerseys or generate a ton of headlines, but he's exactly the type of solid, dependable role player the championship teams are built on.